meeting of the City of Palo Alto for Wednesday, April 26, 2023. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chair Burt?
Here.
Councilmember Lowing?
Here.
And Councilmember Vinker?
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. So our first item is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not otherwise on the agenda. And do we have members who would like to speak?
Yes, sir, we do. We have 3 currently signed up. If you're in Zoom and you'd like to speak, please use the raise your hand function. And we'll be able to speak for 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Jerry Brozell. If you'd like to come up to this microphone and make your comments.
Okay. Oh, you got to push that. Okay. I'm just here to say thank you for all your hard work. That's all.
We'll take that to the bank.
More of those speakers, please.
All right, our next speaker is Iak Nordman, and I do have a presentation. Just 1 second.
So, okay, it's kind of
I'll do full screen.
not being displayed correctly.
All right, go ahead. Sir.
Okay. Hello, my name is Eric Nordman, and I'm here to discuss, request a thought that you look into the need for pedestrian bicycle crossing before rail work. Next slide. Rail construction will make crossing the train tracks difficult and stressful. Long detours or stressful conditions are likely to cause many students and bicycle commuters to resort to driving or being driven. The proposed bike crossings in North Palo Alto are separate from the road construction, so building these beforehand is straightforward. Next slide. Even if an underpass is built near Matadero Creek, it would represent a 2-mile detour for those who would normally cross at Charleston. One possibility is a crossing at Lindero. Lindero is midway between Meadow and Charleston and would provide a low-traffic neighborhood route for young bicyclists. Sorry. The concept for this undercrossing is described in the following slides. Next slide. A ramp could be built in the center of Lindero Drive, similar to what's being proposed for Seal. The ramp would connect to a tunnel under both Alma and the train tracks. On the other side, one residence would have to be acquired to accommodate the ramp from the tunnel. This would allow easy connections between Bryant, Park Boulevard, Bookie Way, and the busy James Maybell school route. The tunnel is straight, so people could see to the other end for enhanced security. Next slide. A long ramp is required with wheelchair landings to get down to the tunnel. The Churchill option 2 that the city had undertaken had ramps of around 300 feet, so I'm using that as a guideline. The crude sketch at right shows that ramps of about 400 feet long could fit on the property, so it's clear that a ramp could fit on the property. The planting area in the image between the ramps could be lowered from the street level to provide more open feeling. Below is an image from a Menlo Park concept to give you a feeling of what a serpentine path may look like. I'd like you to think about investigating the possibility of construction of a bicycle and pedestrian access points before rail construction. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Frank Engel.
Am I on?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to sit back a little because my granddaughters have COVID. I'm trying to protect you. Here's me.
Thank you.
So I know some of you personally, and I'm here to endorse some of the same ideas the previous speaker did, in that this project's going to take a long time and be very complicated, and it's going to probably experience delays. And my ideas, it's kind of the same idea that if you can provide an underpass for pedestrians and bikes at least Churchill and Charleston and Meadow, or maybe one between the last two, then that would allow the reduction of bike traffic, car traffic, and bike fatalities and pedestrian fatalities. So I strongly endorse finding a way to do that in such a way that it works with the rail plan so that whatever you build can be used directly as a part of that plan. And look at the end of California Avenue as an example, where Caltrain built that long ago as an underpass directly from California Avenue, where the train station is, directly under the rails at Under Alma. That's my whole talk. I've been in Palo Alto 40 years. I'm an electrical engineer. As conversant of train and rail issues as any engineer in the community, which is to say not very much, but I'm interested in and will follow the development. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, we have one more.
And one more comment, Adrian Brandt online. Mr. Brandt, you can unmute and speak for up to 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I virtually attended Menlo Park's Greenhorn Quiet Zone study session last night, and I just wanted to kind of report or share how that went. Went quite well, and the council did opt to do basically what's known as quad gate, 2 of their 4 crossings, those 2 being Ravenswood and Oak Grove, and I believe that those carry about 75% of their crossing traffic. The other 2 are more residential crossings, and it turns out that the regulatory authorities will allow a quiet zone to cover all 4 of those crossings, even though they only do the supplemental safety measures of just Ravenswood and Oak Grove, because the taken as a whole, the 4 crossings, the risk index, according to the formula used, would be lower with the quiet zone and the new quad gates than today. So the other 2 crossings won't immediately require any costly changes. And the reason for that, going that route, was just to lower the price tag, because doing all 4 crossings was going to be over $8 million, which I think was quite an inflated pricing anyway. But and just the 2, which is the direction the council has directed staff to continue pursuing, would only be $4 million. And separately, the council is also going to reach out to many funding sources, including the High-Speed Rail Authority, which is according to their approved EIR, going to need to do quad gates at all crossings on the corridor. And so any city that does install quad gates, whether it be Palo Alto or anybody else, is really saving the High-Speed Rail Authority money that they'll have to spend down the line. And doing it today will cost less than in the future. So I am optimistic that there's an excellent case to be made that just similar to how the High-Speed Rail Authority advanced money for Caltrain electrification from the Prop 1A bookend funding bucket, that there's an excellent case to be made for them to advance the funding on the corridor for something they're going to need to do anyway, which is the same rationale for electrification funding to the cities that want to implement quiet zones and add quad gates to their crossings. I'll also note, unfortunately, as most of you might be aware, there was a suicide again at Churchill just last Sunday or the Sunday before, a Stanford student. And so this again just reinforces that it's a reality check on that even crossing gates and all this kind of stuff, when people are intentionally wanting to end their lives, it's a very difficult problem. And really the only way to do that is fully fence the right of way or grade separate. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes our public comments. And now we go to our staff reports on first Caltrain, then VTA and city staff itself. Mr. Kami.
Thank you very much. In the interest of brevity, I'll kind of combine both of ours to just say that city staff and Caltrain are coordinating on the San Francisco Creek bridge issues and the creek issues, I should say, and the Caltrain corridor study. I also want to note that regarding the quiet zone study, as Adrian Brandt had just mentioned. We have a presentation tonight to PTC on quiet zones. The process will be PTC, and then we'll go to our Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee on May 2nd, and the City School Traffic Safety Committee on May 18th, and then that will follow to the Rail Committee. The one last note, just again in the interest of time, is that Palo Alto is planning to host the in-person and hybrid meetings for the May county, city, county, staff, and Caltrain group, and also the LPNG meetings.
Thank you. And I realize I did have one question on the San Francisco Creek Bridge and embankment issues. We had a concern with the opposite bank of the El Palo Alto tree, and whether there was going to be a study to make sure that there was not an impact on that, as well as I don't know the latest on the report that was being done by our former arborist and the other person on the El Palo Alto tree. So if there's any updates on either of those two things.
Yeah, we followed. Good afternoon, Ripon Bhatia, Senior Engineer with the Office of Transportation. Regarding the El Palo Alto tree report, we did follow up with Mr. Doctor and Robert, and we haven't got any response yet, but they intended on doing an extra video surveillance through the drones once would finalize this report. We are continuing to follow up with them, and as soon as it's ready, we'll share it with the Rail Committee as well as with the Caltrain. So thank you.
And then on the embankment, north side embankment work, is there going to be a hydrologist who will make sure that there's not an impact on the opposite bank?
Councilmember Burt, yes, there will be.
Thank you. Okay, and then Philip, any update on VTA activities?
Yeah, well, not specifically on VTA activities, but I did want to also note that we spoke today with VTA. Ripon and I spoke today with VTA regarding the NSU earmark, and just noting that they confirmed to us today that the earmark is going to be eligible for planning usage for the 8 grade separations that need to occur in Santa Clarita County, north of the Diridon station. So they're going to get back to us with more information. That was really kind of the limits of what they had today, but they are working on a TIP amendment, which is the Transportation Improvement Program, with MTC, and they anticipate that will be entered into the TIP in August of this year.
Great. And just so everybody appreciates too, my understanding is that Congresswoman Eshoo, one of the reasons that she pushed to get this earmark through is because then these grade separations get even greater federal attention once the first dollars are in on that. So she wants us to all apply for those dollars as quickly as we can and utilize them productively. Okay, and then any additional reports from city staff?
No, thank you. That's it.
Great. All right, so now we can move on to the first action item, which is a review of the services agreement between the City of Palo Alto and the Peninsula Corridor Joint Power Authority, that being Caltrain, for the connecting Palo Alto grade separation projects, and a recommendation to the City Council for approval.
This
Nicole,
will be
you
yes.
taking? Thank you.
Good
Welcome.
afternoon, Chair Burt, Councilmember Vinker, Councilmember Lowing. I'm Nicole Sultanoff, Deputy Director of Capital Program Planning at Caltrain. I'm here today with my colleagues Robert Bernard and Navi Dhaliwal, who will let introduce themselves very quickly.
So welcome. I really appreciate you having us here today. Rob Bernard, Deputy Chief Design and Construction, been with Caltrain for about 2 years. Been doing public transportation and transit infrastructure for about 38 years, and I'm glad to be here at Caltrain in order to participate in this vibrant community.
Good afternoon, Nabi Dhaliwal, Government Community Affairs Officer at Caltrain. It's about to be a year now, my journey with Caltrain. Previously worked with in a PR or at a PR firm doing community outreach and government affairs across the Northern Bay Area and Northern Valley region. Specifically at Caltrain, focused on capital projects along the corridor, including those in Palo Alto, as well as transit-oriented development projects in San Francisco and San Jose. So wonderful to meet you, and thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. So then, as far as on the agreement, who would like to introduce the item?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll just, again, be very brief, just to note that, goodness, what month was it? Now I have to recall. I was trying to reboot my computer. December. So December, we were here to talk about the agreement. We had started reviewing a draft agreement at that time. City staff and Caltrain staff, again, have been coordinating and meeting fairly regularly to hone in and refine the service agreement to get it to a place where we all feel comfortable with the service agreement. And today, Caltrain staff, significantly more Caltrain staff than I even had anticipated. So I'm glad to see all of you. I know that there were some other conflicting meetings that I think Caltrain staff maybe has rearranged in order to make it here today. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I guess Caltrain staff will be diving in and giving you an overview of the agreement.
So we have a few slides today. We compressed a lot of the information that was shared with the Rail Committee on December 13th of 2022. So with these slides, we hope to bring this year's new Rail Committee members up to speed on Caltrain's approach when it comes to service agreements. But we invite the audience to watch the December meeting video for more information on about the service agreement framework. We also look forward to discussing the draft service agreement available in today's meeting packet with the committee after this presentation. We can move on to the next slide. So I'll try to be brief. The service agreements are the framework that enables Caltrain staff to allocate appropriate and valuable time to individual third-party projects like grade separations. Service agreements include a detailed scope, preliminary timeframe, and a budget that estimates Caltrain's costs to provide coordination and technical review in support to third-party project sponsors during their project development. Why are Caltrain services needed on such projects? So first, Caltrain is an operating railroad. You have heard Rob and I use the analogy that working on an operating railroad is like an open heart surgery. You need to keep the patient alive and functioning well. So for Caltrain staff, it means that we need to coordinate multiple projects simultaneously while ensuring all our systems are in a state of good repair and our service keeps running at an appropriate level. The how matters, and it's not for consultants to determine, and we need to be involved. Second, Caltrain retains decision-making authority on what is acceptable. We have hundreds of pages of criteria, drawings, specifications. These are items that are stated as standards. We also have guidelines that require judgment in order to be implemented, and that's what staff can provide in terms of support. Also, Caltrain has multiple operating systems. Many systems are safely critical. Modifying them as part of third-party projects require our work. Fourth, Caltrain projects have long-term operational and maintenance implications. Early design decisions can have implications for long-term operational and maintenance costs. Caltrain has an obligation to provide efficient and cost-effective services. Therefore, Caltrain needs to weigh in on those decisions early on. And fifth, Caltrain is required to coordinate with our tenant railroad, UPRR, and high-speed rail as part of our agreement's requirements. Now, why pay Caltrain? Caltrain receives public funds to deliver efficient and cost-effective rail service. That means all funds we receive go towards the management, operations, and maintenance of Caltrain's service, commuter rail service. Efforts such as the corridor crossing strategy are funded through our 3 member agency obligations, VTA Measure B Fund, San Mateo Transit Authority, and the San Francisco CTA. For Grade separation projects are local jurisdictions projects. Local jurisdictions are set up to seek dedicated funding for those purposes. However, for all the reasons that I just mentioned as fast as I could, Caltrain staff time is necessary to implement local jurisdictions' grade separation projects. Therefore, all grade separation projects along the corridor use a cost recovery model, and service agreements are the framework for Caltrain to recover this cost. Next slide, please. Now that you got an overview of the framework, the team wanted to emphasize that Caltrain executes service agreements across our entire corridor. Service agreements supports grade separation projects, bike and pedestrian crossing projects, and other municipal projects that impact the railroad right-of-way. In addition to service agreements, we have other agreements, memorandum of understandings, cooperative agreements to support grade separation projects and major projects. These images represent examples of agreements that were executed under execution in 2022. More service agreements are also currently being discussed to prepare grade separation and bike and ped crossing projects to further advance into the preliminary engineering phase and final design phase. For example, Caltrain Technology, Operations, Planning and Safety Committee, the TOPS committee, recommended this morning that Caltrain board authorizes Caltrain's executive director to execute a service agreement with the city of Menlo Park for their Middle Avenue undercrossing project. Next slide. Very quickly, we wanted to highlight the scope of work that the draft service agreement available in your meeting packet would support. This scope builds upon experience Caltrain team has developed working on various grade separation projects, and it integrates the comments we received from Palo Alto staff and rail committee members in December. This draft service agreement scope includes planning coordination and technical review of the 5 alternatives currently under the city's consideration. That technical review will be primarily focused on vetting the alternatives' viability. The service agreement scope also includes Caltrain staff assistance with the implementation of our railroad standards, policies, and interpretation of our guidelines in actual designs. Through the execution of the service agreement, we will address Palo Alto's questions that require a thorough and technical look at the alternative's unique characteristics and complexities. For example, should the city timeline for advancing these projects not accommodate the timing needed to determine the limits of a future 4-track segment, which staff plan making a recommendation on this fall, Caltrain would support the city in exploring design solutions that will not preclude 4 tracks through the execution of this service agreement. Potential cost implications of not precluding 4 tracks would be audited by Caltrain staff under this service agreement. Finally, the scope includes the independent review of total project cost estimates and Caltrain's support to the city in community engagement and outreach process. Next slide. So as you understand by now, Caltrain's objective is to help the project move forward. To close this presentation, here is a quick look at the next steps we hope today's Rail Committee's recommendation will unlock. With that, we look forward to partnering with city staff in progressing the service agreement forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just add that from my discussions with staff, I understand and appreciate that this agreement has really incorporated a number of our requests, been modified, and we really appreciate it, those changes and refinements. And Philippa Rippon, would you like to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in the conclusion to the Caltrain's report is that we work together in negotiating and developing this agreement, but also wants to let the that any recommendations that come out of this their review for technical review as well as their operations review, especially like fiber optics and the new electrified overhead system that has been developed that was previously not looked at. will also add to the additional work that would be required on the part of the city, and additional amendment to the consultant or a new RFP would be required to conduct that work. So just wanted to note that, and thank you, Caltrans, for supporting this, and thank you.
Colleagues, questions or comments? Ed?
Yeah. Thanks, and I appreciate and trust you guys that you've negotiated this and so on. And it's not like we have another choice and we can talk to 4 other bidders on this thing. I'm also pleased that the number is under control. Timing wise, would this initiate immediately upon signature? Is that what we're thinking?
Well, yeah, and just to note, of course, we would need to send this to our city council for approval. But yeah, following, assuming a unanimous approval on this, I would think it would follow on a consent calendar.
Right. And one of the things that has always been an issue, of course, I'm still coming up the learning curve on this particularly over the last 5 months, is that we still seem to be waiting for your final technical standards, as well as enough information on 4-track or 2-track to make some decisions. So will that also, in fact, tend to start to accelerate that?
Yeah, and sorry, and I wanted to add also, I believe it will need to go to the Caltrain board as well after our council. Confirm that. Is that correct?
That's the assumption. Yes.
Okay. So on the different technical issues, some of those would be within this service agreement, and some of those are within the study that I had referenced earlier. The specific Palo Alto technical issues.
Okay.
And if I may jump in, part of what Nicole had mentioned during the presentation is that the 4-track question would be addressed, and the policy approach would go to the board this fall with the recommendation of where those 4-track segments will be. And so that is intended on happening this year.
Yeah, I did hear that. Yeah.
And my understanding is that the Caltrain staff recommendation will be ready in early fall. And so it's Caltrain's working to have this move forward, so it's not late fall, but rather early fall for the 4-track determination.
Yeah, so this isn't a hostage payment to get our hands on the technical standards. It's
no, they've actually in the last month or so worked hard to try to figure out how they could move that timeline forward a bit.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Vicki?
Thank you, Chair Burt. Just quickly to city staff, what was the reference about fiber optics? What's that?
Good afternoon, Ripon again. There are fiber optics, third-party fiber optics, as well as Caltrain may have agreements with fiber optics along the railroad tracks that were not previously considered in our estimates as well as in our design consideration. So in review of those technical issues, Caltrain would support us in understanding where those facilities are so that we can have a better look at our designs and ensure that those are accommodated as we move forward.
I see. Thank you. So both the third party and potentially Caltrain fiber optics. Okay. And are there any other concerns that staff would encourage us to consider in making this decision?
No, I mean, I think this is pretty straightforward. I mean, this is kind of like getting an additional peer review on the work that we've done. But it's really, in the end, Caltrain's going to need to do this so that we don't have to go back and recreate something in the future, and that has happened. So we want to make sure that we are not going to need to redo our work.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that good purpose, and I appreciate all your work in negotiating it and getting it to this point before us. And I don't have anything else.
And just to clarify, out of the kind of range of issues that are technical issues, some may be part of the updated design and technical standards. Others may still be need to be reviewed as essentially exceptions. Is that correct? So when we have things like reduced bridge decks, would that be part of this agreement review as opposed to awaiting a standard on that?
Yeah, so I believe bridge deck thickness is included within this service agreement as an example.
Good. Okay. And then let's see. And we'll be looking at the construction impacts, things like shoe fly tracks and all that. Is that part of what this agreement will also review?
So in general, they will be looking at overall constructability, design, and technical issues that relates to the initial preliminary designs or conceptual phase, and bring those information forward. And as we review those, that's our understanding that we will work together to identify how that can be mitigated or how that can be resolved in the next phase, and we can move forward.
Well, a reason that I asked that is because when we looked at our alternatives previously, several had assumed the necessity of 2-track shoe fly tracks. And I think we probably can't arrive at a decision on this, what I'm going to bring up during the near term, but I just want to make sure it's out on the table, which is that now that Caltrain is beginning to review a lower service model in the next coming years, because demand is not what was previously projected. When we were looking at the need for shoe fly tracks, it was based on 6 or 8 trains per peak hour, and needing to accommodate that. And the possibility may be that we can have a single shoe fly track if the peak level is 4 trains per hour. So I'm not looking for an answer at this time, and maybe not even in the coming months, that we can do that, because it's partly dependent on Caltrain working through in the coming months, what will be the new service model. And that's only for a few years. That projecting what it'll be at the time of construction is the real issue. But I did want to put that on the table because it was an option that didn't exist when we were previously looking at alternatives, and may exist going forward.
I appreciate the comment, Councilmember Burt. The full funding grant agreement for the electrification project does show a service commitment of 6 trains per hour. I know that we're in conversations with the FTA about the time horizon for implementing that full funding grant agreement obligation.
That's what I understood as well. And so that's why I'm not looking for an answer in the near term, but I still want to get it on the table. It's kind of that open heart surgery. This is the bypass of the open heart surgery there.
Chair Burt, if I may, I just wanted to note that in the agreement, the technical issues that Palo Alto had raised that are included to be looked at in this include the curve of the track, the bridge deck thickness, and the vertical clearance standards.
Okay, thank you. And then we don't have Palo Alto Avenue included, and we aren't moving forward at this point in time on a preferred alternative for Palo Alto Avenue. But I just wanted to, as we still have this issue that may be outside of this agreement, but with the Creek Bridge repair or replacement, if it went to a replacement, then it starts driving a whole bunch of other issues that we would have to tackle. Would those be, if that occurred, would those be through an amendment to this agreement or a separate, just outside of this? How would that be managed?
Yeah, I think to answer your question, I'm not sure if it would be an amendment or a new contract or an additional contract.
I think what we have, the approach we've taken so far has been to stick to the scope, I think, and we would likely enter into a different service agreement to look at issues for the Palo Alto Avenue work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Rob?
If I could, at our last couple of meetings, you did talk about the San Francisco Creek Bridge, and I did want to relate to you that we did go to the management committee in March and recast that project's scope of work to specifically say the next phase will be to do an evaluation of whether it's a replacement or a strengthening and a public engagement process, and as opposed to just marching down the path of a replacement. We did hear you, and we are going to take a real close look at that and provide enough information to support effective decision making.
Thank you. That's really appreciated. And do we have our ex officio member or members of the public who wish to speak on this? Nadia?
Yes. So I know we're just at 15% design, but would you be able to tell us whether so all of the alternatives that we prepared have been looked at with the shoe fly tracks, a double electrified shoe fly track per the requirements at the time. But would you at this point of review be able to tell us whether there were alternatives that could potentially be done without needing the passing tracks? For example, if you used a jacked box. So specifically, I'm referring to the underpass for South Palo Alto, because I think that would really help kind of understand what the scope of the different answers would be.
So as part of the analysis, it's the constructability review to say what is the art of the possible. We are looking at other locations of using the jackboxing to avoid the shoe fly. And so it really depends on the details really matter. It's the type of soil, it's the location, is it underneath a switch, what's the groundwater, taking a look at the details. And I know we are exploring using that on the Castro crossing in Mountain View. And we've engaged our contractor for the CMGC in order for the technical analysis of that method there. So I think it will be part of the analysis to take a look at what's the art of the possible for different solutions.
Well, on that vein, we have the geotechnical study that we're doing. What's the status on that, and how does it align with this work?
So I was going to add that we are doing a preliminary geotechnical study, which includes some of that review at a preliminary level, and we will share that information with the Caltrain as it becomes available. Currently, we have conducted the field exploration data, and that's going through analysis, and we are hoping to bring it to the rail committee and also share with Caltrain probably in the fall of this year. So like in August, September is what our plan.
And apologies, if I can also just add just a minor correction. We are not yet at 15% design. So just to note that 15% will actually constitute potentially a different agreement with Caltrain, where Caltrain wishes to become the lead implementing agency. I do think that's an important.
And is it actually that this agreement would take us up to that point? Is that?
Yeah, potentially.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to make sure I understood previously staff's comments about the fiber cable. Are we saying that AECOM had not considered the location of existing cables when we did all of that utility work and stuff, and therefore this is a complete new thing?
Well, so we will get more information. That's the bottom line, is we will get more information from this than we had previously, and it might not change the plans, but it just will give us more information. That typically some of this information you get at a later phase, or we would have gotten at a later phase of the project.
And then the letter that Palo Alto sent to Caltrain from June 14th of 2022, where we put in all of our technical requests, by my read, the only three things that we are not addressed in this contract, but I think still may be addressed in some way. So there's the percent grade, which I'm assuming is when we talk about the specifics of each alternative is actually going to be addressed. We had requested discussion about freight speed, which I believe is outside of what this agreement is doing, but it's happening at the Caltrain level. And then lastly is the question of usable space under the right-of-way. Am I right to assume that until we have a final design and we know what that space looks like, we can't have a conversation about the space under the presumed thing, since we're just trying to guess whether we could even build anything? Is that accurate?
Yeah, just to note, right now we don't have any alternatives that are under consideration that would have usable space under them.
Right. But I think it was still a question raised because there are still certainly newly elected council members and others who were asking about that issue. And so we still included it in the letter, despite the fact that at the time of the letter, that wasn't necessarily an alternative.
I believe that is a component of the corridor wide strategy. I'm not sure if Caltrain can confirm that, or is it in our second, Robert?
So to answer your question, in our response letter, we did talk about that as with everything, the details matter. And so it would be, what would be the use, the configuration, taking a look at it from a threat and vulnerability assessment, and taking a look at the holistic use of it to see whether that's an appropriate use for the public's safety. And so there are lots of conditions where that's allowed, and there are sometimes that, no, that's not the best thing to put underneath a critical structure. So the details really do matter.
Thank you for that. And lastly, I did notice that both the agreement and the staff report talk about long-term maintenance costs and utility relocation costs. I'd be interested in any historic understanding of typically who does own the long-term maintenance costs. Is that a Caltrain thing? Do you split it with the cities? How is that being addressed? Is the corridor strategy going forward thinking about how that relationship might change the way it has previously? So that's the question on the maintenance costs. Utility relocation, I do remember several years ago, our city manager was able to invite folks from the Alameda Corridor East, and they had talked about how utility relocation was actually the requirement of the utilities. Of course, Palo Alto owns their own utilities, so I'm curious what it means for us. How do we cost that? And then just asking as a resident, does that mean that my utilities pay for that, or the city is paying for that? Which bucket does that come out of?
Those are definitely very good questions. Regarding the first question about the long-term maintenance, and we would definitely work with Caltrain to find out where those activities lie and what are the primary areas where cities and Caltrain would have their responsibilities. So in these reviews, there could be more information that could be, discovered, and we could use that into our consideration as we make the decision making for the selection of the preferred alternative.
But Caltrain already has a series of agreements with other cities. How does that play out?
So in general, we try to keep it in looking at it from the city usually is the road authority, and the city gets public funds to advance road authority work. Caltrain is the railroad authority, and we get public funds to advance railroad work. And so when we have these blended facilities, it's does this infrastructure support the road network, which is part of the road authority and the public funds to support that, or those supporting the railroad work and the public funds dedicated to railroad. And so really when they become blended, it's, well, is that catch basin part of the road where the city gets money, tax money to maintain that? Or is it railroad infrastructure where Caltrain gets money to maintain that railroad infrastructure? So we try to keep those general guiding principles as at least a framework for to start the discussion, if that makes sense.
Sounds like a negotiation. Yeah. I'm just dying to share with you when you were talking about the use underneath a railway, for instance. I will forward you one of my favorite photographs, which is the fish market in Catania, Sicily, immediately under the viaduct. So, and I don't know if the odors are incompatible or what makes it not. Okay, do we have any members of the public who want to speak on this item?
Yes, sir, we do. We have 2 members of the public. 1 second. Screen share. Our first member of the public would like to speak is Jim Fox online. Mr. Fox, you can unmute and speak for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I'm not certain that this is directly related to this, but it is more related to the train in general. It is my opinion that raising the tracks above ground level would obviate the suicide problem, obviate the traffic problem by allowing the streets to go across underneath the tracks, and would be a lot cheaper and quicker and would not require condemnation and eminent domain taking of many houses in the city. I believe people are concerned about the sound of an elevated railway. I believe that is not a problem in experience of Melbourne, Australia, and other places. And I just would ask that you consider or reconsider the elevated railway. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Adrian Brandt.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just to piggyback on some of those, just the prior comments, Melbourne, Australia, here in the Bay Area, the Bart Olone Greenway, Redwood City is planning a community connecting elevated grade separation across the entire downtown and a new elevated station, which would is integral to that plan is completely activating and connecting the space underneath. Just like is being done in Toronto currently. There's a fantastic project there. They have lots of YouTube videos where they're taking a similar to Caltrain commuter line and elevating it onto a viaduct over a freight crossing and creating all kinds of new activated space underneath. So I don't know of any place that activating the space underneath would be precluded by whatever concerns Mr. Bernard was alluding to, but that is something that is a fantastic value-added benefit of the admittedly extra cost of a viaduct, but you're getting so much more for it. And to that end, there was someone was just asking, I think, about the ability to avoid at least one shoe fly track or maybe all of them. And I'll remind you that your consultant AECom said that, and they even did a YouTube simulation, 3D simulation video showing that the viaduct, at least in South Palo Alto, could be built no problem without any private property impact, without impact on Alma, and without a shoe fly. So that would be just by building it because the right of way is wide enough, and that's really a huge win-win because it doesn't involve all those Rube Goldbergian bend over backwards strange machinations that you guys are trying to work through on how to make the bike pedestrian crossings work well and preserve all the different traffic motions and movements under Charleston and Meadow and all of that. So I would urge a revisiting of the viaduct alternative. And let's see, I think I had, oh yes, regarding grades, that is a great point. Nadia brought that up, but grades are a critical element. I think that should be part of any agreement because those really affect your ramping distances and actually change what sorts of alternatives are viable and also how much they cost. And so in San Bruno is the only one I'm aware of that they needed to have an exception to the 1% gradient limit to make that project work well. And I think Palo Alto and other cities ought to pursue that same course because freight train speeds, as long as they're kept down to 45 miles an hour, allow steeper vertical curves and longer grades or shorter grades. Thank you.
Okay, and that's the end of public comment, sir.
Thank you. And I'll just get something else on the table. One of the reasons I've become more interested in not only the vertical curve and vertical grade, but the bridge deck thickness is that it has a real, not only an impact if you have crossing the dips under the tracks, it's the distance that it occurs and the impact on perhaps necessary property takings. And then if it's an elevated track from a hybrid or a viaduct, it reduces the length of that. My understanding is that it may be, if this is correct, that the length is reduced by about 100 feet on each side for each foot of the bridge thickness that's reduced. Is that not correct? No?
I don't think so. Yeah, at 10% grade, it would not be the same case. At 1% grade, when you're on a viaduct, yes. But for a partial underpass, when you're doing a 10%.
That's what I was talking about, was the, on the ladder was either the hybrid or a viaduct.
Okay, on the hybrid.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if it's 2%, maybe a little bit more than that is the benefit. Yeah, got it. Okay, so this is an action item, and do we have any other questions or comments or motion? Vicki?
I just have one comment / question. Just listening to this and the discussion about the viaduct just now. It seems to me that public acceptability could be affected by a couple of factors on the viaduct. One is beauty. And, does it look pretty? You can build it a lot of different ways. So it seems like an asset to be near it as opposed to a detraction. And second is privacy, which we talked about. So are these factors that will be part of the consideration? They're not necessarily technical.
We don't have, as of right now, we don't have a viaduct as a remaining alternative. So from a process standpoint, it would require the council to want to revisit that.
Okay.
And there are a variety of considerations, and part of why it was rejected was the additional costs, and that's part of why I was asking on what portion of those costs might be able to be shaved off. And then there's also an important issue of traffic inducement, which we haven't really been talking about. It's outside of the scope of this agreement, but whatever alternatives we look at, it goes in the next item, and we can talk about it there.
I saw the traffic inducement on the criteria. I just thought, following up on what I thought you were talking about, these options, that these are a couple of considerations, but wherever they come up, I just want to make sure we're looking at them. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I will move the recommendation to that this committee recommends to the council adoption of the service agreement with Caltrane.
Happy to second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Sorry?
So roll call vote is required.
Okay.
Councilmember Lowing?
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker?
Yes.
Chair Burt?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. All right. Our next item is to finalize the upgraded grade separation evaluation criteria and recommendation to the city council. I see our Caltrane folks look like they've got something else to run off to. And so thanks again for both being here today and for your work with us in developing this service agreement. And we look forward to plowing forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Philip.
Yeah, thank you. Again, in the interest of time, I'll just note that this item was discussed at the last rail committee meeting, and we've taken what we heard at that meeting and tried to incorporate it into something that would be actionable at this meeting, and that's the item that's before you. So hopefully we've captured everything that that you wanted us to, and open to discussion, I suppose.
And it looks like we should focus on packet page 37, which is I think page 3 of the staff report on this item, where you summarize the proposed evaluation criteria incorporating the comments that you received. So
yes, that's
what
correct.
We ought to really focus on. Great. Okay. So we have it in our report. Why don't we go to members of the public before we go into our discussion? Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on item number 2?
Yes, sir, we do. 1 second. Oh. All right, Alan. Okay. Our first speaker is Alan Watchell, followed by Adrian Brandt.
My name is Alan Wachtel. I live in the Palo Verde neighborhood. I have submitted some written comments on these criteria as they affect pedestrian and bicycle traffic. I'll try to summarize them here. Please refer to those written comments for more detail. Let me start with criterion A, east-west connectivity, facilitate movement across the corridor for all modes of transportation. This criterion is fine as it is, but it should be applied as it states on its face to all modes of transportation. Don't limit your consideration of pedestrian and bicycle traffic to criterion C. Criterion B, traffic congestion. It's not clear to me exactly what the proposal is to replace this, so I'll go ahead with my comments on the language as it stands now. Reduce delay and congestion for automobile traffic at rail crossings. First, delay and congestion should be understood broadly to include not just congestion delay and intersection delay, but total travel time, because some of the alternatives impose significant out-of-direction travel for certain movements for both vehicles and non-motorized traffic, and that needs to be taken into account. My second question is, why just automobile traffic? If it's proposed to retain that, why not expand it to all traffic? Pedestrian and bicycle traffic is particularly sensitive to additional distance and travel time. Finally, criterion C, pedestrian and bicycle circulation. Provide clear and safe routes for pedestrians and bicyclists seeking to cross the rail corridor, separate from automobile traffic. Here, the emphasis in practice has fallen heavily on the element of separation, and that biases the analysis in unexpected and undesirable ways. I give as an example in my written comments, the underpass alternative that has the greatest separation, but it's also the least convenient, least direct, and probably the least safe of all the alternatives, because it combines pedestrian and bicycle traffic, including e-bikes, on two-way multi-use paths on one side of the street that connect in very cumbersome and unsafe ways to the existing roadway and bikeway network. Now, I'm not suggesting that you choose a preferred alternative today, but it would be better to eliminate the separation requirement, not to prejudge how the clear and safe route is to be obtained. So my suggested language here is provide clear and safe routes for pedestrians and bicyclists, maintaining route continuity and direct access to local destinations. That's it. Time's up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wachtel. I don't seem to have your email communication. Can you please resend that to the city.clerk@cityofpaloalto.org?
I will do that. I sent it originally to city.council and I did get an acknowledgement.
Oh, okay, great. I just want to make sure we can get it directly to the rail committee. Thank you so much.
Would you like me to do that now?
Whenever's convenient for you.
All right, I'll do that.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Adrian Brandt.
Thank you. I wanted to piggyback on actually Mr. Alan Wachtel's excellent comments just now. I think
Adrian, can you move closer to your mic or something? We can barely hear you.
I'm sorry. Let me.
Can you? Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Technology, you gotta love it. Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on Alan Wachtel's excellent comments just now. I think that his point is excellent. So calling out separate, as he was pointing out, is sort of begging the question or prejudging, putting a value on having things separate. And so my general comment was going to be, I mean, I agree with everything you said, because you could bias it the other way and say, well, make one of the criteria that it would put a value on whichever alternative puts the least changes or imposes the least changes on bicycles and pedestrians and preserves their current ability to move at grade without having to climb or sink down into holes, climb out of holes, et cetera, pass through tunnels. So that would be sort of biasing it in the other direction. So my general comment, though, with respect to all of the criteria, is that I would urge going back through and asking yourself, number one, are there built-in biases such as Mr. Wachtel just pointed out? And number two is try to put them all into very measurable, objective terms. So, instead of sort of subjective, qualitative things, make them quantitative. So how many turning movements are interrupted or discontinued, how many turning movements are preserved, how many square feet of private property are need to be acquired or are impacted, how many linear feet of extra gradient, or how many vertical feet of extra gradient does each alternative impose, how many extra feet of travel distance for pedestrians, for bikes, and for vehicles, and basically come at it from a very, and when you talk about sound, use decibels, and if there's no significant difference, then say so, et cetera. But I feel like they're in reviewing, and I'm not calling on any specific criteria, but there's a lot of sort of subjectivity built into the set as it stands now. And it ought to be more measurable and more objective. And under those criteria, of course, I'm biased. I think the viaduct would do a lot better. I know it's not on the table anymore, but whether it is or isn't, I think that, the comments still stand and are valid. So thank you.
Thank you. So now we'll return for our questions and discussion. Who would like to go first?
Yeah.
Ed?
Yeah, generally, I think that you followed our comments quite well and did enough wordsmithing to get the point across in most cases. In contrast to what one of the public members just said, I don't think at this level of valuation criteria that we can get too quantitative, because as the people from the Caltrain just said, the devils are in the details, and that even changes crossing by crossing. When you get down to a project level, I'm totally supportive of that. But for example, the one I want to talk about is visual impact. I think saying minimize visual changes along the rail corridor it is right. We can't really get too specific about that. Or when we say duration of construction, we don't even have an estimate yet. So we can't get into specifics about how long it should take. But on the visual impacts, maybe in general, but I think it's in the visual impacts. Are we comfortable that we've got enough privacy considerations in that one? Given that there aren't any viaducts, it's not as crucial as if we were going to put everything up in second story level. I'm probably okay with it, but I just want to raise that as an issue for us to talk about amongst ourselves.
Vicki?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess just following up on my prior comments, that even if we don't have the viaduct currently on the table, who knows how the winds blow, but those, I do think that the privacy and visual impacts concerns are still relevant, and make are things that we should consider. Privacy, I think, in particular, and I don't really see that here. The one thing I might differ slightly on from my colleague, Mr. Lowing, is I don't know that we necessarily want to minimize visual changes. I had always thought that way, but I think we want to make sure that we have either neutral or positive visual changes, I guess I would say. It could be that we change a look for the better. I think we just need to be open to that. So I might want to reword that. I don't have the words right now, but I will work on them, but somehow to make sure that we are enhancing the visual impact as we do the construction.
I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah, although I'm not assuming we can enhance, but I agree with the concept that what we're on the one hand, we want to minimize detrimental visual changes as opposed to necessarily assuming all visual changes we want to minimize. And if there's an enhancement, then great. I'm not sure what that would be, but well, if it was a trench, that would probably be an enhancement.
Mr. Chair, at the appropriate time, I'd like to comment on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just note the inherently subjective nature of that conclusion, and how an enhancement in one person's perspective can be a detriment in another, and suggest that the council might not want to set yourself up in a situation that could lead to that being the debate. I think that enhancement may be a bar that is very difficult to clear.
Yeah,
it could be an example like more landscaping along the tracks or something like that, which would be uncontroversial and maybe less subjective.
Yeah, or certain walls or fencing, or I think the visual impact could arguably be positive, but I take your point that that's going to be a subjective thing.
Well, what if we simply eliminate whether it's minimize or enhance, and we just talk about consideration of visual impacts? And we, for instance, we even within the South Palo Alto alternatives, we still have the hybrid, which has essentially similar or greater visual impacts than a viaduct would.
Yeah, I like that. Consider visual changes along, or the impact. Consider visual impact, I think is what you said, and I like that because we don't necessarily want to minimize the visual change. My instinct is usually we would, but there could be instances where it's better to actually actively change them.
And then I did want to talk about this issue of quantification versus subjective standards. And so first, I agree that where we have available data, it's useful to quantify, but not from an expectation that quantification will determine a value, but it simply informs. And then I think it might be valuable for us to put in, we don't have weighting of these criteria. And that would add a whole order of magnitude of complexity. Weighting is valuable, but it may depend on the particular location, how we would weight one of the given criteria. So I think what we may want to do is just put a preamble that states that these are the impacts that the criteria will evaluate. We will quantify what we can, and we will recognize that we will, by necessity, have to weigh them in a subjective way. They will be weighted, but it's going to be subjective. And there's not much getting around that.
Yeah, I don't have much to say other than I agree with that. I think that some of these are inherently subjective and also will have different, very, very different values to different people.
Yep. And then on B, we say maintain corridor travel times, but I'm not sure what the baseline is. We had, when we were looking at this before, we were pre-COVID, work from home travel times. And then we also not only have that impact, but we have future major housing development patterns that would affect given corridors. So similar to our last discussion, I don't think maintain is, maybe it's too restrictive, and maybe we just have to default to consider again.
I could make a suggestion.
Yeah.
So you might say maintain or improve, because I think that's ultimately the whole point of doing these projects is to leave us in a better place. So,
but from when?
Well, I think going back to objective measurements, the only real objective measurements you have is whether or not intersections will do well or not on the eventual traffic study that will probably have to be redone by the time this is built. But so something that sort of refers to what happens at those intersections, because I think the second part of that phrase is about taking care of the inducement problem, which is something that would also need to be addressed, because there are some of these alternatives that actually make the intersections worse than they are today, despite the fact that we're building this to make things better. And I think that can be because of the inducement that it will cause. And I do think it's something that might be fixable with other traffic stuff that is beyond my level of skill.
And that those places where it would make them worse are not necessarily at the construction or at the place of the underpass, but it may be nearby where additional traffic backs up the Charleston at El Camino, et cetera, or.
Well, and in this case, some of them are actually very specifically at the crossing where they are. Yeah. So Charleston and Meadow would be worse, for example, under the viaduct. But more because we looked at that without doing any sort of any road treatments to prevent traffic inducement. And so I think knowing that that is part of what we're trying to solve for is important. And each particular crossing has its own traffic pattern that is not necessarily intuitive. So for example, Churchill is mostly used by cars to go north-south on Alma. There really isn't a lot of traffic going in from like the El Camino to Old Palo Alto. And so I think I absolutely agree. We don't have a baseline to understand what we're measuring against in terms of travel times, but I think something about inducement is definitely important.
Just the phrase that we have is reduce risk of inducement, traffic inducement. Maybe that's as close as we can come.
Yeah, and I think you want to specify auto traffic because we do want to induce bikes. We just may not want to induce them at an intersection where they get stuck. And so this line specifically refers to cars because the next one very specifically refers to bikes. And in terms of the bias that Adrian Brandt was talking about, this was very specifically carved out as a result of existing comp plan policy and other transportation policy, meaning we as a city have generally said wherever possible, we'd like to separate bikes and cars as much as we can because it feels safer for the bikers. And so I understand that the way this is written and thinking about a grade separation, it seems to prefer an alternative where you fully grade separate, for example, at Alma, like the underpass does. But that is generally a city policy that we are working within. And that is why the original criteria talked about that. And so I think putting exactly what you said about the preamble at the beginning of this is super helpful because XCAP did go through the exercise of trying to weight these things. And ultimately, actually, we had one XCAP member who was great, Carrie Templeton, who actually built an app sort of thing where you could kind of flip the different pieces and weight them as you wanted. But ultimately, everybody was just weighting whatever they thought was important. And so, yes, unfortunately, you elected straw the short straw for running for government.
Well, that still might be a useful tool for individuals to use for their own purposes as they weigh them, even if we don't collectively agree on it. I had one other thing, and then given that I have to leave, but it looks like we're real close and we might be able to take a vote. Maybe
I did have one more that I think you're missing the word impacts. So on letter G, environmental impacts, it says review sustainability sea level rise, but I think we're missing some words as to what you mean to review there.
Right. And that was my final question is, do we need to clarify what we're referring to when we say review sustainability and sea level rise impacts? Is that what would cover it? What was intended? Okay. Well, if it's all right, I can make. Oh, Vicky, you have something else?
No, I was just a wordsmith to that, but I'm fine with what you do.
I can make an attempt at capturing what I think we just heard. So first, that we would like to have a preamble that states that these will be used with subjective weighting, something to that effect, and we'll defer to staff to word that. We'll give the concept at this point in time, if that's all right, unless you have wording.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify subjective weighting mean subjective by the reviewer, not
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Not weighting by any other man.
That's right. Okay. That the reviewer will by necessity be imposing
in its own judgment.
Yeah. And in the context of a given location. Mm-hmm. And we should probably add that too, because I mean, second, under B, to add the word auto after reduce.
Did you want to say consider? Supposed to maintain? Is that that?
Yes. Sorry. So also instead of the word maintain, consider corridor travel times. Under G, to add the word impacts after sea level rise. Under I, to replace the word minimize with consider, and to add after visual, add the words and privacy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sorry, was that where we landed? I'm trying to remember if we, if you
yeah, I think so. It'd be
consider.
Considering visual and privacy.
Yes. Yeah, that's what what I remembered.
And we have changes. Should we simply say impacts? Yeah, I think that's better.
Can I recommend that for under B, we do automobile rather than auto?
Sure. And I think that covers it.
That's good. Yeah, I would second that.
So then I'll move that.
I'll second.
Great. And roll call vote.
And just to clarify, was that Councilmember Lowing or Vinker that seconded?
We'll go Vinker.
She can.
Councilmember Vinker. Okay.
Arm wrestle.
All right. Roll call vote. Councilmember Vinker.
Yes.
Councilmember Lowing.
Yes.
And Chair Burt.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. All right. Good work today. Efficient. I just want to note, in case anyone wants to attend it, is it when we have the on Friday morning at 10, the VTA has their grade separation ad hoc committee meeting, and maybe we can have the city clerk share the link if anybody wants to sit in on it. It's the three cities, the Sunnyvale, Mountain View, and Palo Alto, and a sharing updates on our grade separation progress and questions and information. Anyone else have any? The next meeting is coming up, and we may be polling folks on what would be the best start time going forward. And that's the 24th. And it appears that I have a Caltrain overlapping meeting from 1:30 to 3:30. We have a city budget meeting at 6:30. So I'm not sure. Maybe we'll poll on morning or in between or whatever, or if we have to, a different day. So it looks like we've got tight schedules, and we may have to poll for that meeting and not have it at a standard time. So we'll do that by polling. On that note, yeah, Nadia.
So through the chair, I was going to recommend that when staff brings back the geotechnical stuff, it was always assumed by XCAP that one of the impacts of having the technical study is that it might impact the alternatives that are possible. Most specifically, the trench will have more detail, but that might be the appropriate time to have the conversation that Councilmember Vinker was asking about in terms of whether we want to remove an alternative and bring back a different alternative. And so maybe when we schedule those, if we could schedule that as a duo, then you would be able to both have that conversation and have a conversation about what to do next about the remaining alternatives.
Yeah, and recognizing the committee would only be able to make a referral to the council on reconsideration.
Thank you.
All right. All good? Okay. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.